On December 31, 2006, a transaction closed the book on a debt that had lingered since the end of the Second World War. The British government sent its last payment to America. This wasn't for the weapons used to win. It was the final fee for the privilege of staying in the fight at all. For 61 years, the British public financed this obligation. 3 generations settled a bill for their ancestors' survival. But the official story is a carefully constructed myth. The truth is far darker. What's remembered as a heroic alliance was, in reality, history's most profitable foreclosure. While Britain battled for its life, America meticulously acquired its empire. So how did the United States transform from a reluctant partner into the sole beneficiary of a global war? And what hidden clauses sealed this fate? Our story starts with a confession. In late 1940, Prime Minister Winston Churchill composed a critical message to President Franklin Roosevelt. History frames it as a brave request for assistance. It was actually a statement of financial surrender. Churchill had to admit the United Kingdom was insolvent, not struggling, bankrupt. At the war's outset, Britain was the globe's preeminent economic power. It commanded a vast empire, held immense gold stocks, and its currency anchored world trade. Yet within a year, this wealth had evaporated. The mechanism was an American policy called cash and carry. The rules were merciless. Britain could purchase vital supplies, but only with immediate payment and using its own ships. No credit, no delays. So Britain paid and paid. It launched a secret naval operation, moving its entire gold reserve across the dangerous Atlantic to Canadian and American vaults. This was the greatest movement of physical treasure ever seen, and by the end of 1940, it was gone. The money had run out, but the war had years left to run. What then? Enter the legend of Lend-Lease. President Roosevelt presented it with a simple parable: lending a garden hose to a neighbor whose home is aflame. A tale of generosity. The reality, negotiated in secret, was a brutal financial audit. The American negotiator, Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau Jr., issued a staggering demand. Before any aid flowed, Britain had to prove it was utterly penniless. He required a complete inventory of all British assets worldwide, every factory, every investment, every holding. Imagine the scene: London under bombardment, while officials compiled a liquidation list for a foreign power. The intent was clear: Britain would be stripped clean before receiving a single bullet. The first major asset on the block was the American Viscose Company, a lucrative firm owned by British interests. Morgenthau insisted on its immediate sale. British officials pleaded. A forced sale meant massive losses. They received an ultimatum: sell or the Lend-Lease bill fails in Congress. They sold. Valued near $100 million, it fetched barely half. The proceeds went directly to the U.S. Treasury. This was not commerce. It was a financial seizure, and it was merely the opening act. Morgenthau's team forced the sale of over $1 billion in British investments within the United States. A century of financial influence liquidated overnight. But the extraction wasn't limited to stocks and bonds. It included land and strategic power. Even before Lend-Lease, a desperate Britain traded 50 aged, nearly defunct U.S. destroyers for 99-year leases on British bases across the Western Hemisphere. From Newfoundland to the Caribbean, America gained a network of military footholds. Britain traded centuries of strategic advantage for a fleet of floating relics. The Lend-Lease Act passed in March 1941. It provided the material that kept Britain standing, but within the agreement's text lay a time bomb for the British Empire. Article 7. It obligated Britain to end imperial preference after the war, the system of tariffs that bound the empire's economies together and shut out competitors. In essence, Britain agreed to dismantle its own economic fortress, guaranteeing American business unrestricted access to its markets once peace came. So Britain fought, sustained by American supplies, while signing a contract for its own economic demise. But what happened when victory finally arrived? Japan surrendered in August 1945. The world rejoiced. 1 week later, Washington made its move. President Truman canceled Lend-Lease. Not gradually, immediately. Supply ships at sea were ordered to return home. Britain stood victorious, starving, and industrially wrecked. Its only option was to beg for a loan. They sent the famed economist John Maynard Keynes to Washington. He argued for a grant based on moral sacrifice sacrifice. America offered only a punishing loan with vicious conditions. The most devastating was sterling convertibility. Britain had to make its currency freely exchangeable for dollars. Keynes recognized the trap. Nations across the globe held sterling they could only spend on British exports. Convertibility would trigger a stampede to dump pounds for dollars and superior American goods. He was correct. In July 1947, convertibility began. Within weeks, a tidal wave of pounds crashed into the market, draining Britain's dollar reserves. The disaster was so swift that Britain abandoned the policy after just 5 weeks, financially crippled. This collapse triggered a geopolitical earthquake. Impoverished Britain informed Washington it could no longer afford to defend Greece and Turkey from Soviet expansion. That withdrawal note directly prompted the Truman Doctrine. Global leadership formally passed from London to Washington. The war wasn't won on battlefields alone. It was decided in balance sheets. The 1946 loan was never forgiven. Repayments continued for 6 decades. The final transfer occurred in 2006. So who ultimately profited? American banks collected fees on the forced sales. Corporations snapped up discounted assets. The industrial sector boomed on wartime contracts. The United States emerged with most of the world's gold, its currency as the global standard, and military bases encircling the planet. This is the blueprint of modern supremacy, not seized by force but acquired through contractual leverage during another's existential crisis. The pattern is recognizable today. Crisis, dependency, and concession, transferring sovereignty under the guise of support. The so-called special relationship was forged in British vulnerability. Britain survived the conflict but sacrificed its empire, its treasure, and its position as a leading power to do so. If this revelation about the true engine of geopolitical change resonated with you, support HistoWell channel. Please like this video and discover more untold stories on HistoWell. Your support means a lot.